And I am live. Okay, so if you're watching this video on demand, in other words, you're just watching this on YouTube after the fact, I would recommend maybe skipping a minute ahead because what you're watching is actually a live stream. Yes, the pressure is on, but because you get to watch after the fact, you get to skip a minute ahead, get rid of all that nonsense you don't need to hear about. Is the stream working? Is the audio working? You don't need to hear any of that, but the gist of it is we're going to be doing Nodevember day 14, which is camp. I'll show you what we're going to do, but the twist is I'm actually going to do shader nodes. Okay, let's get into it. So, what is the situation? The situation is we have Nodevember day 14. If you look at it, yesterday we did cabin, which I did a log for, so I actually ended up finishing that render and doing a nice little breakdown. So look at that. There's our final result. Cylinder, points, bark, da 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 da. So these are the exact steps we did yesterday. And I was thinking, I'm like, okay, so if this is cabin, then maybe camp should be taking this log and setting it on fire. That's what the wife recommended, and I'm thinking to myself, that's too much work. So that's not what I'm going to do. But for day 14, which is camp, I have a different idea. You remember these things? Fishing bobbers? When I was looking for this, I was like typing in buoy, and I couldn't find it because that's not the name for it. So fishing bobber. When I think about going to camp, and I never had the specific experience I'm about to say, I picture myself fishing on the lake near where everybody's swimming, and there are these tiny little fish poles designed for tiny little hands, and where it lands on the water, there's this bobber, and then underneath there's the hook with the bait. So I want to make this bobber in a way that it kind of looks like this, but the interesting thing is, I'm going to be doing this in shader nodes, no geometry nodes. That's how Nodevember used to be like in the medieval ages, pre-geometry nodes. We're going to use vector displacement, material displacement, and I somehow need to do it all there. Do I have any other reference? Here's like the smallest GIF in the world. So this is actually a pretty good example of what I'm going for. I want water that goes up and down. The buoy should come off of that somehow, and ideally bob and react to that, even though there's no geonodes. I want reflections, I want vector displacement, and we'll use a sky texture. That is the plan. So let's do it. I'm going to open up Blender, and I've been recently made aware of something I didn't know was the case, which is the repeat zone, where we love it, we're used to it. Apparently, it is in shader nodes now. Look at that. So apparently we have a repeat zone, which works almost the same. The only difference is this has to be a constant number. You can't make it a function of something, where in some cases it's 5 iterations, in some cases it's 6. Has to be a constant number, because internally it's just going to duplicate the nodes. And I was also made aware that bundles and closures are in shader nodes. So I did not know any of that. I don't know if it will be useful, but it might be useful. Okay? So what do I want to do? I want to save day 14, Nodevember day 14 camp. And I'm going to be really interested to see if I still have the skills. I feel like I've been so, like, I want to say sedated by geometry nodes, its ease of use, that can I still, like, do a hard shader nodes thing? I mean, it's inherently more limiting. We'll find out. So if I remember correctly, there's a very specific setup that needs to be done for these. So in this case, I am going to use a single plane, so not procedural, but one face, and everything has to come from this face. So this is going to be our, again, Nodevember day 14 camp. And let's make a material. No, that's geometry nodes. Let's make a material, call it that. And for displacement, there is EV displacement nowadays, right? I'm not 100% sure. Let's see. So I'm going to add a subdivision surface modifier set to simple with a lot of iterations. I assume one thing Is that adaptive subdivision? Is cycles only? Yeah. But I just want to see what Eevee can get us. So here I have a plane with a lot of geometry. Like if I was to apply this, it's like, wow, there's so much geometry. I want to displace this. Okay. Well, to do that, I need some vector that I'm going to displace by. And then also, how do I enable snapping? Ah, right there. Not used to that. Okay, so I need some vector to displace by. Let's try something super simple, like a combine x, y, z, and the displacement will be 1 on the z. So I expect this to visually look like it's going up in rendered mode. It is doing nothing. Why is that the case? I think we got to go into our material, and inside of displacement, we need to say allow it. Displacement and bump. Okay. So you can see now, if you're not used to shader node magic, which is a dying art because it's just not as useful for these kinds of tasks as GeoNodes is. But yeah, adaptive subdiv is now like exposed. It's like an official non-experimental feature. So in the dark ages, what we do is we do our procedural modeling fully using vector displacement. So to make this easy for us, I would recommend hiding the background, and anything we do here, we can also do in cycles, right? So I can hop between the render engines. It's just that Eevee is so, responsive. And then for the texture, I'm going to use a sky texture, which works minus the sun disk, which is fine. And yeah, okay. So the first thing I need to do, I guess, is I need to make a water surface that is going up and down and all around. And ideally, we make it a little fancier than a moving noise with the W slider, but we'll see. So I'm going to make a height map that says, is the water high? Is it low? Is it settled? And we'll put that in the z-axis. So just as a start, noise texture is the obvious place to go. So boom, we have that. Note, by the way, that displacement will assume that, we're kind of starting at 0 position. So if we want to go up and down below the XY plane, turn off normalize. We're then going to take the factor. We're going to multiply by a tiny number, even tinier. And to make sure that we can see what's going on, let's make this darker. There we go. Even tinier. And this resolution is going to be dependent literally on our subdivisions. Long time no see. Okay. So how do we make this water surface move? Well, there's two ways. So the simple approach, like I was saying, is you take a 4-dimensional noise texture. What this lets you do, once it's computed, is you can change the W really slowly. And that is an approach. The other approach is you take its coordinate system, which can be position, it can be generated coordinates, whatever. I'm going to be using position. And you can add an offset, which looks like that. So this is more so for waves, the other thing's more so for changing stuff. So we could also combine the two. And then as far as I know, we don't have a time node, right? Like a scene time node? No. Well, we can do this with drivers. So let's start off by taking our W, type hash frame. So what hash frame does is it looks at the frame number. So frame 1, 2, 3, whatever. And we're going to make it really slow. And even that might be pretty fast. And I want it to be a nice calm water. And just for anybody who's hopping in right now, and for my own sake, let's get some reference in here. There we go. Let's make the scale like this. So now we have water going up and down, but you can see it's looking very, even though it's peaceful, it's looking very static. So I would also recommend moving it across the surface, and this can also be slow. And maybe it should be even more subtle. Yeah. Okay, I like that. One thing that might bother you, I don't know if it bothers me yet, is that it's obviously like one directional, except for, the W slider, putting in that work. but we might want, two sources of perturbation. And if you remember learning things, there's the superposition principle, which basically says if you have two waves, it sounds very quantum physics-y, but whatever. If you have two waves, they add when they're overlapping, right? So if I have two big waves, when they're connected, they're now twice as high. If I have a positive wave and one going negative, they cancel each other out. This is how noise cancellation works, and superposition is just a fancy word for addition. So too do waves work like that. So what that means is I can take another noise texture and maybe offset it, this time on the y-axis, by a different rate. But the interesting thing about this is like, oh, why didn't you put a driver in the x and the y? What's interesting about this is I can have a totally different seed. Okay? So here's one noise texture once it computes. Here's another noise texture once it computes. I guess that's the thing about Eevee. It takes a while to compile shaders. But let's see, is cycles substantially better? Yeah, maybe we'll just do cycles. But like I said, the superposition principle says that we can add waves together. Okay? So now when I look at this, and I guess this should be shade smooth, and we could do adaptive subdivision. I don't know if we need it yet. Adaptive subdivision will basically make it so it subdivides based on how close to the surface we're looking. Yeah. Yeah, let's use adaptive subdiv with a... Ooh, I didn't know there was object space. Interesting. That's new. This pixel amount basically says how small does it have to be for a subdivision to happen. So as this number grows smaller, it gets more and more detailed. It's going to be different in the viewport than the render. So I'm just going to bring it down for the case of the viewport, and you can see all of a sudden it smooths out a lot. So what we expect to see is now this kind of like two-dimensional motion. And is Eevee better to preview this? No, it's just too slow, right? But we should have this... come on. Yeah, we should have this nice two-dimensional motion where they're superpositioning on top of each other. Doing the dirty. Okay. Just going to change this number. So this could be the basis. Could be the basis for our water. And then once we want to make it water, we just take the principle to be SDF, for example. Let's kind of reprioritize things here. We would basically take our principle to be SDF, say, oh, make it bright, make it shiny, maybe metallic, and something with specular. IOR 1.3. Basically, I want to make it reflective water, which, by the way, we'll get to this, because right now I'm mainly on displacement land. The secret to getting nice water is because what it is it's a reflection of things happening. You want to make sure you have like a good world texture, but assuming we just have this, another thing you can do is you can add a stupid amount of detail using bump mapping. So if I do this right here, okay. Now why is this looking the way it is? Okay, there you go. So now you're starting to see some like details popping through. And if I bring down the strength, so needs a bit of work, but this is how you get like a very clear watery surface. Okay, so as for displacement, we have this. So this can be the basis of our water, which can also, again, be more detailed, whatever. The next thing I need is this buoy that, just like the other stuff, is using superposition to be on top of the water. So there's always going to be this dome on top of the water. Well, how do I plan to do this? Well, if I look from the top view, I can basically define a circle from the center. So that can just be like its length in terms of the position vector. That's going to make a gradient. And I take that and I say add to the z based on that distance. Okay, so what does that mean? What I mean is I can take the position and I can look at the length of it, which will look like this. By the way, it does care about our displacement, just so you know. So I'm going to take the position, making sure to only look at the xy component. Otherwise, you have to account for the, existing coordinate system. So I'm only going to look at the x and y component. And I want to make a radial map. So I'm going to start by inverting it, because I want to say wherever it's white is where the bobber is going to be. No, Eevee is slow because of shader compilation. Different thing. And I want this to be the bobber, so I'm going to make this nice and small. And you can think of this as not only a mask for where the bobber is, but literally a height contribution. So I take this water, I then add this, and now we have that. Okay? So why does it look so whack? Well, first of all, you're going to see that it's very tall. That can be fixed by just multiplying by like a smaller number. And maybe this is something that's better to see with like a neutral gray. So you can see we have that. The second issue is that it's very linear. It's like cone-like. If you look at its side profile, it's a line. That is exactly dependent on our interpolation. So if I took our map range, set it to smoother step, now we have something like that. We want the exact interpolation that gives us the height of a sphere. Interesting. Well, if we look at this from the top view, remember, essentially we have this gradient map. I want it so at the center, it has a height, a radius of 1, and it falls off to 0. So 1 to 0. But it has to fall off in a way that makes a perfect dome. How do I do that? Well, I know the equation for a circle centered at the origin is x squared plus y squared is equal to, I guess, radius squared, which is going to represent our height. And what do I want to do? I want to know how the radius should change as the xy changes. So that's just going to be, the radius is going to be the square root of x squared plus y squared is equal to r. But I guess the only difference is I want it inverted, so it's highest at the middle. So maybe I start at 1, and then I subtract a radius. So 1 minus this is going to be equal to 1 minus the radius, which should be our height. Should be our height. In other words, we got to do something. So, how do I intend to do this? Well, we have our length. Fine. I want to take 1 minus, and this might take some finagling, because I don't think I got it exactly right. So I'm going to take 1 minus, so now it's like that. And now that is it's either the radius or the radius squared. So what happens if I take a square root? What shape does that give us? Let's find out. A good way to see is to only use this, height of 1. Okay, so this gives us a shape like this. So we'll know it's correct when it's a perfect dome. When it's a perfect dome. And I know I'm fudging it to begin with. I just need to think about this. So imagine we have a sphere along the x-axis with a center of 0 and a distance of r. How do we map this curve exactly? Well, again, we know the radius here is constant. So how do I want to do that? I don't think sines or cosines are what we want. I think, let's go big so we can think bigger. So again, if I have a unit disk 1, then 1 is equal to x squared. Well, I guess if we think about this one-dimensionally, in this case, 1 is equal to the distance from the center. No, that would be two-dimensional. X squared plus y squared. So again, the question is, how do I map that? It's like simple, but it's breaking my brain a little. That is equal to r squared. Well, we know how to compute radius. That's like the length of the position. That's easy. But I guess the thing is, like, to get this line exactly isn't that hard. It's to get this fall off. It's to get this fall off. And I wonder, gradient texture? I think there is a mode for this. Is it spherical? What does spherical look like? Well, let's plug in the position coordinates to spherical and see what that gives us. So that gives us a line, which is not what we want. Spherical, quadratic sphere, diagonal. No. No. It's like none of these are exactly what I want. Why can I not think of this? So it starts at 1 and then it falls off radially as it goes. So it should be 1 minus the square root of the length, no? Clamped. Okay, that's looking a bit more promising, but that should probably be a parabola. Anybody in the comments with the insight? Nobody has the insights. Okay, that's fine. Okay. So 1 minus the radius squared. And then you round it out with a square root? Maybe? Square root. Aha! Boom. That is the equation for a dome, apparently. So it's 1 minus the radius squared in terms of xy, and you take a square root for some reason. We could think about that later. So now, to shrink the size of this, all I need to do is take our coordinates and shrink those. And I'll clean this up in a moment. So to shrink those coordinates, I'm going to scale them like this. But I guess if I make it 3 times smaller, it should also be 1/3 as tall. So that needs to stay proportional. So let's say I have some value here for how much I want to shrink it by. I then divide by this number. Perfect. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Can I get it a bit darker? And by the way, these lines right here is a subdivision issue, which we'll figure out later. So there is a little bobber for fishing. Okay. And we're lucky in that we're going to say we only see the top half of this because this curvature over here is a big problem. It's an overhang that height modeling can't replicate. Like you could do something with vector, true vector, not just z displacement, but whatever. And as I was claiming, what I said is we had this water that was, I got the punchline. As I said, we have this water that is superpositioned. I added 2 noise textures. So too can we superposition on top of that, I was hoping, a buoy. It's like almost the case, but it's also inheriting the water. So it almost needs to take like an average height of that area. So you see the issue? So if I was to make the water like very calm, the issue would still be there, just not as visibly. Right? I don't know if you can tell. Would ambient occlusion work better to show this? No. Let me play with some of these color settings so we can actually see what's going on. Standard? Nope. Chronos? Nope. High contrast? Gamma? Okay, gamma. So you can see it's kind of morphing our shape because we're treating it all like jelly. It's like I want that, and then anywhere where this is, it flattens and then puts that on top of it, which might be a tricky proposition. So let me think about that. We'll either keep it like this, which is fine because it should be on gentle water anyways, but just for my satisfaction, I just want to know if I can figure this out. So we have the waves. So really the only difference is we did the sphere calculation assuming the plane was flat. Once it starts waving, now we need a difference in height, not just saying add this height, because it would be different contributions at different points. That's kind of the issue. So it's almost like if we look at our calculation over here, that's ultimately dependent on the position. It doesn't account for like all this other stuff over here, even though it's only a height thing. Either way, let's start consolidating a little, just so I know what's happening. So these represent our waves that I'm going to scale by some number. So this gets a node group. I can call it waves, only parameter of which is going to be the strength. And that outputs the waves. Okay. And then I multiplied it by 0.2 for some reason. Oh yeah, because I wanted it to be super calm. Okay. And then over here, I took the position and used that to ultimately create a bobber. So, I guess all of this, except for the position and the scale, I'm going to turn into a thing. So for the input, we could think of it as the radius of the bobber. And as for the vector, you can't default it to a position like you can with geonodes, which is a shame. But I'll do position. That creates a bobber. Is there a way to cancel the movement for that specific little circle area? That's exactly the question. So yes, well, I don't know the answer, but that is the question. And we'll think about it. Okay, so now we have this nice little bobber that, oh, it's kind of like an inverse radius, isn't it? Well, whatever. That's fine with me. Okay, so we have that. We add, we make it the z component, and then we look at a principled BSDF, which I can get rid of this for now. So this is pretty easy to read as is, but now again we have this issue where I go like this, and it all makes sense, but it's like the bobber, yeah. So it really is almost like I want to take an average. So let's see. Assume the bobber doesn't exist. We have some height map. How do we put a sphere on top of that? Well, we don't just add it, because if we add it, it will look like that, like a big offset. I want it to just add as if the shape is there, in which case it has to account for the height that already exists. Okay, I have an idea. So this bobber, remember, has a length, and that length basically will help define where is there and isn't there a bobber. So I'm just going to output that. Okay, so let's make this much tinier so we can actually see what's happening. So this is our bobber, and then this one should be exactly the map of where it should be, correct? So I'm going to take this, I'm going to ask where is it greater than a certain number, like 1. And that should be exactly it. Okay, so this is the section for that. So what I can now say, knowing that, is I start off, let's do it like this. I start off with some waves, just like we had before, and let's make them a bit more intense. We start off with some waves. I then want to say, oh, the bobber is going to be over here. In that case, take that area and make it equal to 0. So basically cancel it out. Okay, so I'm going to mix this with 0 based on this, which is actually the opposite of what I want. So now you could see it's waving except for there, where it stays at 0. Okay, and then for that area, now that we have that, maybe instead of just setting it to 0 and then adding the contribution of the bobber, I just mix it with the bobber. There we go. So now it's almost like the water's passing through it, which of course isn't exactly what you want, but look at that. Now you might be thinking, what in the frickety is going on over here? And that's a good question. What's happening is the limitation of vector displacement in this case, which is we need geometry and it's fully dependent on this subdivision surface. So I thought adaptive subdiv. Yeah. So like as we bring this number closer to 0, so I'm going to make it 0.1, you're going to see it kind of smooths out. But there is a limit because we're setting like a harsh cutoff for where is and isn't the bobber. So what I need to do is instead of having like perfectly black and white masks like that, even a tiny bit of fall off can mean the world. So maybe from 0.9 to 1 goes 0 to 1, which clearly is inverted. Okay, so you can see already that is much more smoothed out, but it should be more like that. Okay, great. Only other thing is the bobber is much higher than the water is on average, which is fine because I'm just going to take these waves and offset them a little. So this way it's almost like these are separate objects, but I'm bringing one up. So can you kind of see what that's doing? Just like that. Okay. And then, like I said, we can smooth out our fall off a little. Just like that, right? And the time for harsh fall off, or like basically no fall off, is in texturing, not the displacement. So I'm just going to bring it down to 0.3, just so we get a slightly sharper edge. And does this do anything? Unclear. So somebody's saying you can make the bobber dependent on the height of the thing. No. That is the point of shader nodes. It's on a per shading point basis. There's nothing to blur or to average. There is no blurring and shading. Whereas in geometry, there's fixed points or vertices that store data. Here it's like infinite resolution. That's why you got to get a bit trickier. Okay, so now to have this bobber indeed bob up and down, all I need to do is I take its height contribution right here. So I'm just going to call this our mask. I take its height, right? So you treat these as separate elements, and you want this to move up and down as a sine wave. Now, of course, ideally it should be referencing the water, but like I said, that can be tricky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little up and down function, in other words, a sine function. That should probably not go as high as that is. So I'm going to multiply by 0.1, and then let's see, as I move this, still way too much, divide by 5. It should just be subtle. Even that's too much. And then what is the kind of speed of this? Well, that will be the frame number divided by like 100 or whatever it is. And you got to be really careful here, because really the name of the game is just hiding this seam. So let's make the water a bit flatter, which will help. And by the way, remember, all of this is a single polygon. That's the beauty. And yeah. Okay. To invoke there being both red and white, we're going to be using shader tricks, but I'll get to that in a moment. Okay. And anything else I want. I think another thing that will really sell this as much as I can is if you look at my thumbnail here, or you look at this, you're going to see there's little water ripples coming from the middle. Now those are subtle. They can either be in displacement or they can be in bump mapping. But the way I would do that is just like I did with the mask. So remember, if I look at the mask, I have, this information. I could totally take this and run it through anything, like a sine function. This kind of sine function. Okay, can you see what I'm getting at? This can be our ripples that you can see are mapped onto the surface. And additionally, we can animate those by offsetting our sine. So now they grow outwards or whatever it may be. So those should be dense, and they're not going to exist forever, right? There is going to be an ultimate distance they can reach, which is going to be determined by some like scaling factor. So if I look at map range, I want it to be like white in the middle, black in the distance, so something like that, but then with a bit of fall off. Okay, and when I multiply this, now we have this map that I'm going to add animation to. And that clearly is way too slow. Okay, make that negative. And there you go. Now we got those rings coming out. And if you want to be super technical, the fall off here should be quadratic because energy dissipates over a two-dimensional surface, right? That's why those rings kind of do that. I don't think it's exponential. I think it's just a inverse quadratic fall off. I don't care. It looks fine. And the cool thing is we can take this, we can distort it, whatever. Okay, let's consolidate. So all of this is going to be our like little wave things, which we'll deal with later. What is this? This is our mixing, like that. Okay. Okay, so we got our waves. I'm adding an offset to this, which also gets a strength. What even is this? Oh, this is the overall height of the bobber. Am I tripping? What's happening here? Oh, right. Okay. So this is our bobber. So let's call it, oh wait, no, we already had our bobber. This is our like bobber offset going up and down. So I can call this like floating, maybe, is a good way to put it, with some strength slider. And then, like I said, this is going to be our ripple map. Okay, and I think the best course of action is probably to actually do it in shading. But if I did want to do it in displacement, it would just be, again, all of this is superimposed on top of each other. So you would literally take a math addition, and this is why I was thinking, oh, water would be perfect for this. Okay, so what's happening over here? Well, we got our fall off, which I'm going to set to smoother step just to emulate quadratic, inverse quadratic. I'm going to make that tiny, tiny, tiny. Even tinier. And you're going to notice that we have the same issue we did before where it's like overlaying on our bobber. So just like before, I'm going to take this, like where it happens, and let's multiply it by some cutoff, which again was where the mask was greater than or less than 1. Which again will cause that issue, but now that looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. I think the only thing is it should be more subtle. And probably a bit slower. So let's have this be 7 at a higher frequency and at a lower strength. Too slow. It's all vibes. Okay, so there is our geometry for the most part. And at any point, we can just kind of go into the waves, be like, waves should be distorted. And now you have, distorted water. And maybe we should just a little. Yeah, that's looking nice. And I wonder how denoise plays with this. That's actually quite useful. Okay. Yeah, once we render, it is going to be way better because, again, whatever I use for adaptive subdivision, this number 0.3 actually applies to the render. You can see it uses an 8x multiplier here, which means it's showing a way lower resolution version. So just for example's sake, so right now we're actually seeing 2.4. Let's go to, and again, I don't know what these numbers represent. So let's go to like 0.1, see if that's fine. Yeah, I mean, that renders, right? So we can play with that, but that's looking pretty good to me. Let's just tone down that distortion we just added a little. And let's start shading. Before we do that, we can also have the bobber go left and right. Now, of course, that's a little tricky because now the ripples will move with it and it's not going to be exactly realistic. But that's something we could do. So I believe all we would have to do is we take our coordinate system and we offset it. You see how I do? Now you see how I do. So maybe let's have it move over time using a one-dimensional noise texture. So in other words, number goes in, like the frame number, and then a vector, or whatever we want, comes out. So I'm going to turn off normalize, so it could go left, right, up, and down. So those can be positive or negative numbers. But speaking of up and down, I do not want any z-axis. So let's see what that looks like. Just as predicted. So clearly, we need to scale this down. So let's do 10%, see what that looks like. Okay, so that's a fine area of effect. It's just like too much, right? So let's make it 4 times slower. Okay, still too sharp. You want to get rid of the detail and the scale on this. That'll make the noise less like, oh, it instantly like turns direction or whatever. That's nice. Let's make it like that. And that's quite fancy, honestly. So if we look at this at baseline, like I get rid of the displacement, this is what we made. It's really hard to see. Let me crank that bad boy up. This is what we made. It looks much more fancy once you actually see the displacement, but we're just building a displacement map. You could do more vectory displacement where you take advantage of X and Y and then you can get this overhang, but this is pretty good for me. Another thing we could do is you see this bobber has a little hat. I think it ought to have the little hat, right? So how do I add the little hat? Well, we have our bobber that is floating. We could take that and do anything we want to it, including adding a little hat. So the way that would work is right now we have our map correct. So if I put a float curve, it should just be fine. But then you could shape and do, not that, but you could do weird things to it. So maybe let's do a addition where we add a contribution where this length, again, you want to do fall off, but just for visualizing, I'm going to use greater than. So where it's greater than whatever, I'm going to add a multiplication. Less than. And there's that little hat. So like this is just kind of like geometry nodes with way less feedback. You just have to like keep it in your head what you're doing. But that would work. And again, if you want to do vector displacement, you could get fancy where it rotates left and right and does whatever. Okay. So like I said, instead of less than, you want to take advantage of your fall-offs. So we're going to go from 0.1 to 0.15. Invert that. Okay, so before, after, and I'm just going to kind of clamp that a bit more and smooth it. Okay. So ideally, once we add geo, so I'm going to go to 0.1, we hope it smooths out enough, at least at a distance. And that looks pretty good to moi. Okay, cool. Oh, and I should mention, this is actually one of those cases where the fact that I put free nodes on cgmatter.com does not matter at all, because those are just geometry nodes. So I will say if you go to my website, cgmatter.com, you go to the member site, every Nodevember thing I'm putting in here. So yesterday was the log. You can click this to download the file. There's that little breakdown. You could watch the stream. And when I'm done doing whatever it is I'm doing here, so too will that go up. So far we've been going for 45 minutes, and we have most of not just the shape, but the animation down. Okay? And I also believe as we darken this, maybe, the shading errors will be a bit more forgiving. We'll see. Either way, what is next? I would say what's next is texturing, which isn't much, right? You just have water, and then in certain areas it's a bit different. So let's just make 2 principled BSDFs. Each one's going to act a little differently. So this is the water one. That's going to have low roughness, and it might be hard to model this in a one-dimensional plane that doesn't have any volume, but we'll try. So you want your water. I always forget if metallic's what you want. Like I know it isn't metallic, but IOR 1.33. That's just a fact. That's the index of refraction of water. Transmission. Ooh. Ooh. Maybe transmission was the way all along. Okay. And if you were here at the very beginning of the tutorial, you might remember that I said all the detail isn't actually in this. This is just the animation. All the detail comes from your bump mapping. So if I do something like this, let's say, and we'll play with this in a bit, but just pick some numbers, make them big, connect, view, distort, detail, and make it softer. You can see there's already much more going on with the water. Something like that. Okay? So before, after. Again, you just want to figure out what that is. Now, the issue with this approach is as I play this, does the texture map on? Almost, except with this height. Okay? So somehow we need to create a coordinate system where it attaches onto the surface. That accounts for vector displacement. And the solution's super simple, but let me just kind of illustrate. So if I use position coordinates, now we're even more trouble because it goes up and down, left, right, whatever. I need it to stick on. Well, what did we do here? What we did is we started with a position, which was the position of a single plane, right? And I did a bunch of fancy stuff to add vector displacement. So in other words, this is the position plus the displacement, and that makes the new position. P new position. So any coordinate system, I hope, because I'm hyping it up as if I know what I'm talking about, should follow that rule. So I take the position, I include this displacement, and what I hope is now it's mapped onto it. Is it? I can't tell. I honestly cannot tell. Let's look at the top view. No. Shows what I know. So we did this. All of that contributes to our total displacement. And what does it not like about that? Is it an object scale thing? No. It should be that. It should be. I wonder, you know what? I wonder if the issue is that we have a bit of W happening. That would be my guess. So for example, if I go into the waves and just temporarily, I'm going to delete these drivers. So got rid of that driver, that driver, that driver. Yeah. Yeah, it maps on. It's just that we are shifting the coordinates themselves. So we would expect this to shift as well, I think. Without, with, subtract. Anyways, boom. Okay, so let's say we'll work on this, but let's say we like this water material. If we do, then good for us. We then also need this, what am I trying to say? This bobber, this bobber. And this is where I do need to figure out this like moving coordinate system thing because the height of these colors depends on it. So let's say I have red and white, right? So let's say we start off with white. I want to isolate this little hat, When I look at the coordinate system, and specifically I look at the z coordinate, you can see it's looking hella whack. And this is because of the displacement stuff. If I look at object coordinate, let's see if it sticks. No, it doesn't, which is what we expect. So here you can see it's slightly here, and it's going above and below. So this is what I'm saying. We need a coordinate system that moves with it so that we can make certain masks and selections. Okay. So this, I believe, is where I need to get this to work. So let's see what I can do. So first of all, I'm going to try to get that right number. So let's say it's this. Does this map with it? It doesn't, even though we're adding. Subtracting? I am confused. Yeah, because we took the position and then we did this displacement. That should be working. Clearly it's not, but it should be working. Okay, well, another way we can do this is because we're doing exclusively a height map, although I do want to figure this out, is we need a mask for this hat, which we happen to have inside of our bobber, right? So remember, we did this, and then we added a contribution. So I can call this the, I don't know, I can call it the hat, maybe. And note that the hat isolates this even as it's animating, although it's flickery, but it does do that. So maybe even better than that, is, do I just want the overall mask before I do anything? I think so. That way I can like call and do stuff like that. Okay. So I'm going to take this mask. I'm going to check where is it greater than or more so less than a certain number. And I'm going to isolate the hat. Find that hat. And this should map on. Yeah. Because it maps from the top view, and this is just a height map, ultimately. So let's do 0.1. Nope. 0.15. And this seems somewhat cleaner as well. Okay, so now we have that. Let's say we take that and use it to mix a color. Because ultimately, all we need to do is mix between white and red. So this can be white. This can be red. And this can be the BSDF. Okay, we got our colors isolated. We also have our water and our bobber, which, just like everything else, can be mixed together using our mask, which I believe in this case we know should be exactly 1, right? So I'm going to take our mask from before. So all of this is coming out of here. And it's important that it comes out of here because we also offsetted the bobber itself. So I'm going to check where's this less than 1, which I believe should isolate it, maybe with a bit of buffer area. And let's check. Yeah. Okay. So now it's all a game of getting it right. So 0.9. It's fine if the water goes in a little. Okay. This thing should be shinier, so I'm going to bring down the roughness, and it should work just like anything else. What else is there? There's quite a bit of specular. It's quite shiny, and it's not metallic at all. Okay. Not bad. Not bad. I could also leave the impression of this red thing. It's only that the only issue is that technically what would be red would be under the water. But note how this is doing like self-reflections and all of this with the red. It's pretty interesting. I could leave that impression and see if it looks good, right? Well, to do that, again, we look at the mask. We always look at the mask. And in this case, what I can do is let's actually compare. Because I need this to be not just bigger, or no, we can just have this be bigger or less than something. Okay, so I'm going to check, where's this greater than? Just something like that. So it's a little hard to tell what I'm doing here. But if you see this as the thing, and then this as the cutoff where it transitions to water, I want to catch it somewhere in between there. Okay? Because I want to define that area as white. So here we have the white hat. I then add this contribution. So now this is also white. It looks like that. It looks like that. It looks like that. So can you see what I did here? I'm just trying to catch that right before it dips under. So here you can see that effect here. And maybe we could be kind of generous with this. Not that generous, though. There's a limit. Nice. I really like these rings, by the way, that are coming out. And note, the closer you get, the fugglier it looks. Once I get out of here, you can't even tell. Okay, so let's do a bit of compositing or something. And I believe there's no reason this shouldn't work with motion blur. It's just moving positions of a thing. So for this one, I'm going to give us the orthographic advantage, as I like to call it. Things just look better when they're orthographic. I'm going to use my good old 4x3. I just want to get, do I want to show that this is in fact a single plane? Maybe that's like the interesting part. I'm not sure. But once we like fix the camera angle, we can then fix the lighting and have this catch the light or do anything that looks very pretty. Okay, so I really like that isometric look. Maybe we should zoom in? No. Maybe the issue is it's just not supposed to be orthographic. Okay, I think I can be happy with that. So now that we have our now that we have our camera angle fixed, let's do the do. Oh, by the way, I just realized UV texture would probably stick on. Either way. So I'm going to pick my lighting to be this kind of like afternoon lighting. Afternoon meaning more like it's about, the sun's about to set. That's nice. Okay. Let's see. No sun disk, mega sun disk. No. We'll do that. It's going to have an altitude of 0. This is like sea level. Rare time where I can give that an exact value. I just want to, yeah. Might just be compositing at that point. And again, all the normal things should work, like depth of field, for example. I'm going to focus right here. Bring down my thing because it's not to scale. Before, after. Fixes all the issues. Okay, great. Final quality of life things. The bump mapping on the water is looking whack, right? Before, after. Like, I do like bump, but it's the distortion that looks stupid. So something like that. And then what happens if I, like, max out the roughness? No. That's what makes it look stupid. So this. this, 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 this. Should be really subtle, whatever it is that I'm doing here. By the way, watch Harry Potter. Do it. Okay. That's quite nice. The only thing is that this camera angle really gives away that water to buoy, bobber, fuck, I can never remember, kind of map, which I guess is an invitation to kind of fix that up a little. So you can see what I mean, right? So 0.95 is already a lot cleaner. Great. And that lets me push this downwards, which will give that illusion of 3D a bit better. Yeah. That's nice. Okay, what else? What else? I think it's just inherently going to look weird in that it's not above the water, but that's fine with me. We can always make the water calmer because we made parameters for that. So I could just go like this, and now it's a super calm water. And that, in fact, might be one of the things holding it back. It needs to be calm. Needs to be calm and slightly less detailed. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So now we just hope that more geo gets rid of that, and we can check. So remember, right now we're actually just seeing 2.4 pixels, right? And if I was to render it, it'd be 0.3. So that's like the level of detail. It's like a fraction of a pixel. Such a fucking pixel. I'm going to take pixel size and make it 1, which will be giant in viewport, but in render it should be super tiny. And to check this, let's just do like a low-res render, maybe ambient occlusion, and I'm going to skip out on motion blur for now. So remember, everything, it's a single face. Damn right it is. Okay, let's see what that gets us. Yeah, 4:3 is my new thing. What if he makes some green shapes outside the camera so it can reflect some color on the water? Maybe, but it needs to be with nodes. Doesn't mean it's impossible. Like I could just extrude an area and do that. But okay, let's try some compositing. I was watching a Robin Squares video. That was very informative, but actually the main thing I picked up, it's an obvious trick, but I should have been doing it all along, is he uses the image editor as his viewer, and he uses the compositor nodes just for that. No backdrop. That way it's nice and clean. So here you can see that's cleaned up quite a lot, actually. Like, that's nice. And let's see our maps. We have ambient occlusion. We could totally take that, mix it in if, if I wanted to. Before, after. Doesn't add much, but it's there. Let's throw this through the glare. Sheesh. Bring up the threshold for what counts as a glare. It's fine. Bloom. Disgusting. Still disgusting. It's just too much. Okay. Let's try a bit of color correction. So, Chronos? Nope. Aces? I like AGX better. Okay, so is it a warm or a cold day? So let's try warm. Let's try cold. Neither. Lower exposure. Yeah, this kind of looks like a dumb render. Like I might need to work on the camera angles and stuff. But that's nice. Let's throw on our classic vignette. 0.25. And what can I do to make this not look like shit? It almost like benefits from seeing, oh, it was made out of a square this whole time, in my opinion. So maybe let's lean into that a little. So camera, 55 mil, zoom out like this. And especially if I'm gonna do a breakdown, which I think I will, that would be nice. Okay. And just so we can see here, what does that look like? Oof. Okay. Let's compare. So this is before, and this is after. Once it starts rendering, it's after. Oh shit. Okay, I was going oh shit because now the render is at 0.2. Set that to 1. Okay. To make the glare even less intense, since it doesn't want to cooperate, what you can always do is you can mix with the glare. So this is the glare isolated, this is the thing isolated. You set it to addition. So what this will do is it will be no glare, max glare, some glare, just easier control. Yeah. Yeah, this needs tons and tons of work. But before I wrap up here, let me just add one more pass of detail. Okay, that definitely helps. Okie dokie. So this definitely needs work, but we officially did, by we I mean me, officially did Nodevember with shader nodes, a long lost art. And it only took a little over an hour. So as always, cgmatter.com. Get your stuff, get free nodes, but that's useless for this project. Just go to the member site. I'm going to upload whatever it is I finish up tomorrow here for day 14. And just as a preview, what do we have on the horizon for day 15? Ooh, trap. I might do some, well, I won't even reveal it. I won't even reveal it. Okay. So yeah, at the end of all these streams, I like to answer one question if anybody wants to ask one. Only one person will have their question answered, and anybody else will not have it answered. So ask now, first come, first serve, assuming it's a good question, and then we'll wrap up. And hopefully people, yeah, learn something, because I learned something. So hopefully you learned something. Okay, let's see. If there are no questions in 10 seconds, then I will end the stream. 10. Well, there is a question. 9, 8, 7, 6. Okay, we have 2, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0. So we have 3 options, I believe. The questions are, will you make a video tutorial for every Nodevember entry? How good were you at linear algebra in college? What's a good way to learn math for 3D? I will answer how good was I at linear algebra in college. Like, it was one of those things where I got an A because the teacher basically fed us the exam. She's like, here's a practice exam. That's exactly like the thing. For some reason, it didn't click with me, linear algebra, because we were just doing those algorithms for like matrix reduction or whatever it was called. If you took linear algebra, you know, you basically go through a matrix using this algorithm. It didn't, not only did it not compute with me, but I didn't get the point of being like, this is just a fast way to manipulate vectors. Like, I just didn't get that. They're like, here's a linear equation. Here's an algorithm to solve it. There's these things called eigenvectors and eigenvalues. Don't really worry about what they mean. They're just there, and there's determinants. And that's definitely slowed me down a little in, like, if you saw the curl vector field tutorial I did a bit ago, that could have been better understood if I had understood linear algebra better. So my like strong subjects were all the calculi and the differential geometry, which is also calculus, and real analysis I was actually pretty good at. It was linear algebra and diff EQ, because they were both just like for the science and math majors, so they taught it a bit different. So yeah, there you go. Thank you everybody for watching. People learned a thing, and yeah, bye-bye.